Okay, in this quick video, I'm going to cover some tactics-based questions that I get sometimes, specifically with the single-point sling, running an AR or some sort of carbine-style weapon and a handgun, and we're going to do some transitions, transitioning from shoulder to shoulder, and why you might want to transition away from your dominant side to your weak side if you're entering a room or popping cover or concealment. And then we'll talk about transitioning with a single point sling to a handgun, a sidearm. And the reason why I want to do this specifically with the single point sling is that when you have a 2-point or 3-point sling, and I can convert this quickly to a 2-point. Now I've got this in a 2-point setup. One, it's going to change how you have to transition shoulders because you're linked in 2 different positions. But in terms of transitioning to a sidearm, it's pretty easy to do that and go to a 2 full hand grip, because you can basically drop the weapon, especially if you're stationary. If you're moving, you may still want to put an arm on this and transition and lock this to your body so it's not bouncing around everywhere if you're rapidly transitioning from point A to point B, moving across the space. But when you get into single point slings, which are pretty common and popular out there, and this is not going to be a debate or a philosophy on why you might choose one or the other. This is for those who have done their due diligence and they've decided that at least in some situations they're going to run a single point sling, and I'm going to talk about transitions with that. So if you want to get into the debate about when is it better or worse, or what's the pros and cons between 2-point, 3-point, single point slings, we can get out of that in another video, or feel free to debate it till the cows come home in the comment section, but that's not what this video is going to be about. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to basically show you how you can, there are other ways to do this, but how I prefer to transition from dominant side to weak side with a carbine on a single point sling. And then we're going to talk about transitioning to a backup weapon. And then I'm going to move the camera. I've got some simulated cover and concealment. We can also simulate an entranceway here on the range. And I'll show you why you might want to have the ability to do this. Not only just if I got wounded on my dominant side, but just tactically moving in an environment, why sometimes it may be better for you to transition. So the first thing we're going to talk about is transitioning from dominant side to weak side. So I've got the carbine here. I'm in a good stance. I've got a good grip, and for whatever reason, I want to run this on the opposite side. I typically rock the butt of the weapon up. If you try to go straight across, you can see sometimes, depending on the type of sling you have, the edge of the stock gets caught there, and you can't get your face around it. So I'm finger straighten off the trigger, rocking the butt of the stock up, rocking back down in the correct pocket on the left side. And I'm going to move my dominant hand off and establish the forward grip. And I'm sliding this hand back in and into the pistol grip with the web of my hand. And I'm in a good stable shooting position on the left side. So rocking up, down, kind of clapping my hand forward here and sliding this back into the web of my hand. Now, there's philosophies out there, or the debates out there. Should I move my offhand first and come off the trigger once I've rocked over, or should I come off the trigger? And the idea for, if I rock over here, to come back to the handle here, or the grip here with my offhand, and then rock this forward, is that I'm quicker to get in the fight in theory, because this hand is already near the trigger. The problem with that, in my opinion, your mileage may vary, is that if I was to come back over here, so I've rocked from dominant side to weak side, coming back here, I've got all the weight, especially if you had a 16, 18-inch barrel, you got a lot of weight out front, you're under stress, you may be moving, and there's not a great place to grab the grip. I mean, it's a single-handed grip, so if I don't want to capture my other hand to it and have to pull it out. I think it's just way more likely that you drop the gun transitioning from, where you're leaving that hand rearward. So I rock over. This is a quick transition to get right back in the fight. I'm only coming off the trigger for a little while, and this is probably something you're doing, maybe not administratively, but as we'll get into in a second with the cover and concealment or entryway, dealing with that sort of stuff in the environment, you're typically in a position where you're setting for the next movement. So you should have the half a second it takes to transition this hand over to the trigger pretty quickly and get back in the fight. Okay, so that's how I transition from side to side. Here's this angle. rocking up, down, capturing the front of the gun, pulling it into my off shoulder, sliding this hand back into the web and rocking in forward. And I'm in a position to fire from there. Going back over, pop, capture, slide, rock, and I'm back in the fight. Now, in terms of transitioning from your carbine to a handgun in a single point sling, there's two common methods for doing that, and I'll demonstrate both of them. So I'm in my strong side. I want to transition to this firearm. As I come off the grip and transition that firearm, with my offside, I'm pulling this high into my chest, and I'm rocking this straight out into the fight, okay? And those two movements are going to kind of happen simultaneously. I'm out, I'm down, I'm in, okay? From this angle, I'm out, I'm down, I'm in the fight, okay? And I'm capturing this high against my body so it's not flopping all over the place. It's not blocking any of my vision. It's not hitting me in the head. I've got this locked in with this arm, and I've got this weapon straight out in the fight. Another way you can do is to pull this straight down. I'm kind of pushing it against the outboard side of my leg so it doesn't hit me in the junk if I'm running, and then obviously transitioning to the handgun from there. So it goes from the shoulder down in the fight. Better or worse, it's really up to you. In my opinion, this is more natural. I feel like it's out of my way. I'm not going to hit it with my legs as I'm running. It's not that much of an issue with something that's really short like this. But in a longer weapon, if you're rocking down, I'm coming from the shoulder, rocking down, and I've got an 8-10-inch barrel hanging down there. It's coming past my knee. I mean, I'm 5'9", so an 18-inch barrel is coming past my knee there. That's just a lot to bump into, catch on doorways as I'm coming in. But you have to consider the length too. If you're rocking up, I'm going to have a longer barrel, but I feel like I have way more clearance in that direction than I do in this direction. If you're 6'7", life might not play out that way for you. But I much prefer to capture this here. I feel like this is a much more natural position to be in. I can get in and out of tight places better here. I do have to consider this thing hitting me in the face. And on a short barrel like this, I don't want that pointing at my head, obviously. So now the likelihood that something on me pulls that trigger and fires this weapon, I feel like it's slim to none. But it's something to consider. I don't want to rock this in and angle this barrel back to me. So that's why I'm supporting it on my shoulder and sort of angling it past my face. So if a 1 in a million freak accident, something was to catch that trigger, and I wasn't in safety, which I should be in this position, I should be transitioning to my safety as I come out of my shoulder. If a million bad things that should never happen, I'm not muzzling my face with that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move the camera and we're going to show you some simulated cover and concealment and talk about the methodologies of why you may want to pop out from cover concealment out of your dominant side and transition over to your weak side. So stand by for that. Okay, the first situation where you may want to transition from your dominant side to your weak side is, let's say you're behind a narrow piece of cover. Or it could be a full wall or whatever, and you want to pop out on this side to check the environment. Now, number one, it's kind of hard from the camera angle for you to see this, but I'm not crowding my cover. I'm a full 2 strides away from where that cover or concealment is. Now, this is just a table standing up, simulating the end of a wall, or it could be, a pillar or something like that. But if we imagine that this side is a solid wall, and I want to see what's in that environment on this side, if I was to transition and pop that corner with my carbine on my dominant side, my whole left side of my body and my head is going to pop out in that environment before my weapon does. And so anytime you're popping out of cover and concealment, you want your weapon to pop with your vision so that if there's something in the environment there right here, right now, you can dominate that space and take command of it. I don't want my whole left side. Imagine this is the edge of the wall. So you see the door behind me. Imagine that was the edge of the cover in front of me, between me and you. If I'm popping that side till my whole head and weapon is past, at this point, if I was popping on that side of the wall, you can see the line above my head. This is how much of my body would be visible to a potential threat before my weapon is. But if I was to transition to my left side, change my footing a little bit, using my weak eye to engage, I can pop that same cover and concealment at the hip. I'm leaning out at the hip. And now as soon as this is past that line, my weapon is in the fight as well. So as soon as I would be visible to someone else, not only would it be a much smaller sliver of me, but I'm in the fight ready to engage and take command of that space. And once you have the space, typically you don't want to give it away. So let's say I was to transition to my weak side, I pop, there's nothing there, and I'm going to enter that environment, or at least dominate it from here. Once I own it, I don't want to pop back in like Hollywood and give somebody else the opportunity to own it. I own it now, and I need to make the decision. Do I stand here behind my cover, or do I make the movement to get into the fight? If I decide to make the movement to get in the fight, that would be a time I could transition back to my dominant side. I'm more comfortable that way. In my opinion, you need to be comfortable enough on both sides to pop and then get to your next place of where it makes sense for you to stop. So if this was entering into a hallway, and there's a teeing section, a perpendicular hallway, 15 feet, whatever it is, that direction, then I'm probably going to stay on my weak side and stay down there, and then adapt as I need to at that next cross section to pop and enter the cover on whichever side makes sense. So being able to shoot from your left side should be fairly simple for somebody who's competent and capable with their weapon and weapon system. But where you get into difficulty on your offside, especially with an AR or something like that doesn't necessarily have perfect ambidextrous controls, understanding how to do feedway clearances and all that kind of stuff on your weak side while you're moving, so you're not having to transition again just to deal with some sort of stoppage you may have. Okay, so now I'm going to move the camera to the other side of the wall so you can sort of see it from that angle and get a better idea why I'm wanting to pop in that direction. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop out. We're going to pretend that this is a forever wall, and you are my potential bad guy, or at least the visual perspective that a potential bad guy would have in this environment. And I'm trying to clear that space and dominate it if possible. So I'm going to be transitioning from behind this cover into this adjacent hallway or open space. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do what most people would probably do under stress if they don't have training. I'm going to stay with the side that's most comfortably my dominant side. I'm going to pop out and try to own that space. And I want you to see just how much of me is visible before I would be in the fight to engage you if you were my threat. Another thing people tend to do is crowd the cover, so I'll do that as well. So I'm right on top of my hook. It's called Hollywood cover. I'm right on top of my cover. I'm going to pop out and try to command this space. I'm having to lean really far out. I'm having to put my foot out really far in this direction to maintain my balance. And now my weapon is in the environment. If you were a threat, I could take a shot. But look how much of me comes out. Bang, now I can take the shot before I'm able to do that. Even if I'm crowding the cover, if I transition to my weak side, bang, I'm in the fight, I can take that shot on the camera when it's here. Okay? And if there's nothing there, then I can start to ply off this space at this angle until I can either transition, I made the capture before. That's something I didn't say earlier. That's something you can do. You can change hands first and pop. I think either one, it doesn't make a difference what you do as long as you're getting it stable. But now that I'm over here, I can pop back out to my dominant side and I can transition into this hallway if need be, or this open space once I've commanded it. Now, I'm going to get back out there and not crowd the space and transition, and you'll see how much less of me you see before I can take that shot. I don't have a lot of room to get too far away from the cover. Bang! I can take that shot. And look at your perspective this time compared to the first time. So I've commanded my space. I'm pieing that off. I realize now I own the space. So if I have a chance, I can transition, pop that shoulder, and I'm back in here commanding the space. And whether I want to transition my hands or pop the shoulder first, it really doesn't matter. The goal is to present as little of myself as possible around that cover concealment. Clear the space, own the space, and then traverse the space if that's what the mission dictates is appropriate. So in a review, going to pop this over into the shoulder, capture, slide in. Okay, it would be the exact opposite in reverse. Shoulder, capture, slide in. If I was going to transition to a handgun, I could go up, out, or I could go down and out. So work on those, add those to your drop fire. If you have a range that will allow you to shoot around cover and concealment, a very interesting thing to do, and being aware of where your muzzle is so you're not sending rounds right into your cover. Because another problem with crowding cover, if you think about it, my bore axis is right here, but my sight is here. So if I'm popping out, visually I may be off my cover, but my bore axis, because I'm so close to it, I'm throwing around right into my cover. So that's stuff you got to consider and think about. But certainly what you should do, just grab a buddy, especially somebody else that may be into these tactical things and defensive training, and just with your, what I call your kindergarten gun, get about 15 yards away from each other with hallways or rooms or some sort of concealment, and play around with popping out of that concealment and how that changes optically for each one of you based on the distance. So you always want to be closer to the cover than your adversary is, if you can control that environmentally. Otherwise, it's more their cover than it is your cover. But don't crowd it whenever you can if you're on a one-dimensional elevation engagement surface. In other words, I'm not worried about people in the third-story building. That changes everything. Then you do have to crowd the cover because you're really trying to protect yourself from the downward inboard projectiles. But if it's a single level environment, then certainly don't crowd your cover whenever possible. And keeping in mind your periphery and everything else. I mean, environmentally, these things can change, but you in one direction of a threat, get a little distance away from your cover. That'll help you a lot. And then add these transitions into your training whenever you can, so that if you had to get here quickly, you've got the skill to do so. See you next time.